So what is really alive for me this morning is that there is, in the face of this pandemic, there is a very poignant and extremely timely analogy that is used in the Dharma on how to refer to the three jewels: the Buddha as the great physician, the Dharma as the medicine, and our teachers and the Bodhisattvas as the nurses to help us to take the medicine, the Dharma. So I just think that there's an extremely beautiful timeliness to this analogy. And what is so profound about this analogy in regards to the three jewels is that it is beyond the efficacy of any vaccine that could ever be created or formed. That the Buddha, through his own experience of the illnesses of cyclic existence, was able to diagnose the problem and its causes, the illness and its causes, was able to use the Dharma to heal himself of all the dukkha and its causes. And then he set on a path to be able to give that medicine to the world. And due to our extraordinary circumstances in this time of the world, we have access to the physician, the medicine, and the nurses to help us. So today, as we continue to share this beautiful poem by Tonglen Sampo, let's see each verse as being prescribed by the great physician, as a medicine for our minds and our hearts to transform them, to be able to eliminate the causes of all illnesses, not only for ourselves and for others, and to take all the teachings to heart, those that we are hearing in these beautiful verses by Tonglen Sampo, one of the great nurses of our world, great caregiver, so that we can progress along the path, not only for our own ultimate healing, but for the healing of all living beings. Let's keep that in mind as we share today. So onward we go. Yesterday, Venerable Damcho covered some pretty important topics in the first 7 verses. She shared about precious human life, giving up our homeland of old patterns and ways of thinking, death and permanence, the importance of having spiritual friends, and where do we want our refuge really to be. So we are beginning to see how the Buddha teaches us how to use the Dharma to take care and transform our minds, no matter how difficult or how overwhelming our lives can get. He gives us the medicine. So yesterday we heard about how the preciousness of our human life is so very, very rare and how to take advantage of it. And since impermanence and death are reality, how to use them to spur our practice, to be able to set our priorities in order, and to recognize where we've been taking refuge. All about taking refuge on things outside in the world that have not given us the safe direction that we have longed for. And that the Buddha is showing us that there is a path to awakening, the supreme state of limitless love, compassion, wisdom, and the end of all of the interfering, disturbing emotions and wrong views that get in the way for us to really actualize our full potential. And that to really touch into, not only do we want to do that for ourselves, but we really want to bring others along and guide them on the path as well. So verse 8 continues with some more wisdom from Tonglen Sampo, and it is titled, "The Next Step. Watch what you're doing. Your actions have results." So we're talking about karma here. So the verse says, "The subduer said, all the unbearable sufferings of bad rebirths are the fruit of wrongdoing. Therefore, even at the cost of your life, never do wrong." This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. Now, I have to say, I was absolutely taken by the analogy yesterday that Venerable Damcho used, the story by Ajahn Brahm. I love the analogy of the truckload of dung. But with this verse, there is an important shift on that truckload of dung. Because the story says that that truckload just showed up on our front lawn, got dumped in front of our door, and it's not our fault. I think that was said twice in the story. Well, guess what, folks? That's not entirely true. We may not have remembered ever ordering that truckload of dung, but way back when, another time, another life, we not only made the order, but we paid to have it delivered. So one of the most important teachings of the Buddha is that, karma, or our actions, that's what's going on here. That's what that truckload of dung is really symbolizing, is the results of our karmic deeds, that we are the creators of our own suffering, creators of our own happiness. And if we don't want that delivery, we have to figure out what the causes of it are and cease them immediately. And instead, if we want happiness and peace to be showing up at our door, what are the causes for that, and to be able to cultivate them? So the truckload of dung, correctly described as trials and tribulations, are results of our unskillful, harmful actions of body, speech, and mind. It doesn't show up causelessly at our front door. We have created the causes for that truckload of dung. And it not only comes this lifetime, but we have a pretty big pile sitting in the front of our yard. So the first two lines, the subduer said, all the unbearable suffering, or dung, of bad rebirths is the fruit of wrongdoing. So it's very important to understand, and I think sometimes we get kind of lost in this when we first meet the Dharma, is that the Buddha described karma. He didn't invent it. He didn't make it up. He saw that when he looked at sentient beings' lives and saw their suffering, and because his mind had been totally purified of all the defilements and had had all the beautiful virtues brought to their perfection and could see the nature of reality, he could trace back the source of that suffering and recognize that it came from misdeeds, harmful actions under the control of afflictions. And when he saw happiness and well-being around those that he met, once again, the wisdom mind would follow back that thread and see that that being had created some beautiful, beneficial actions with joy and love and ethical conduct in their minds. So actions or karma bring results. And then therefore, even at the cost of your life, never do wrong. Now, this is a pretty powerful statement to make. Our lives are the most valuable thing, whether we're humans or little tiny stink bugs crawling on the wall. It is the most precious thing we have. But if we harm, or we lie, or we steal to protect and defend this life, how does that help us in the long term? Now, maybe in the short term it may serve us, as we found out yesterday with the beautiful meditation on the 8 worldly concerns. It may help us and serve us short term. But even in the short term, how many times do our negative actions to get this life, to get this body what it wants, how many times do those actions come back to haunt us in the form of criticism, loss of fortune, bad reputation, all forms of dissatisfaction and suffering? And what Venerable has taught to us many times here over the years is that the reason why we act in harmful ways with our body, speech, and mind, to get what we want, to, acquire things that give us pleasure, is that we are very much captivated by the happiness of just this life. Many times the appearance of this life is so strong that we want what we want when we want it, and don't see the possible harm or problems that may occur due to the actions, usually under the control of either greed or jealousy or anger. By our attempts to get what we want, we are setting in motion these wheels of karma. And that those actions leave what we call latencies, imprints, potencies on our minds that'll ripen in some kind of result in the future. So although we may get some short-term pleasure, if it's done with anger or greed or jealousy clinging in the mind that harms ourselves or somebody else, in the long term we're going to have some painful results. That's the totally impeccable causality of karma. And if the action is done with kindness and compassion, love, ethical conduct, the result will bring happiness or conducive circumstances in the future. So why we do what we do is a very important piece on how karma lands for us in the future. There is a paragraph from Khensur Jampa Tekchok in Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage that I took with me on my long retreat a few years ago that I used a lot. And I want to share this with you. And it's regards to not only precious human life, but karma. Whatever we want to do, it is in our hands now. The great meditators say, if you want to know what you did in your past life, look at your present body. This body is the basis for our precious human life. It is a good result, so it must have been preceded by good causes. Okay, this is where karma plays itself out. Those causes were created in previous lives, so we can infer that whomever we were in the past, we put a lot of effort into creating the causes for this precious human life. And if you want to know what your future life is going to be, look at your present mind. Is our mind unruly, harsh, overwhelmed by attachment, anger, and ignorance, or do we think kindly of others? Are we concerned for their welfare and patient with their mistakes? Our future rebirth depends on our attitude and actions in this life. Your past life yielded this precious life. Don't throw the present life into an abyss in the next life. Because we have created many wonderful causes and great virtue in previous lives, we now have the precious life. We shouldn't neglect this opportunity, frittering it away so we have unfortunate rebirths in the future. That really is the law of karma, pretty straightforward. And that right now, once again, I'm trying to bring this up into present situations and events, is that right now there are a lot of people creating a lot of suffering for themselves in the future. They're afraid, they're angry, they're using their body, their speech, their power to incite fear and hatred and the wish to harm in others. And this is really a tragedy because many of them don't seem to have the tools or the capacity or the interest in refraining this behavior. So not only are they creating the karma to have pretty much similar results in the future, one of the main results of karma that is so important to remember is we get habituated to the destructive ways of thinking and behaving, and then they become our default. So what we're seeing playing itself out in the streets and in the halls of Congress and wherever, and even in our own lives, is that lashing out over and over through our lives becomes a pattern. And then it's well imprinted in our minds that endangers ourselves and others in the future. So just watch what's, and to really bring a sense of compassion to ourselves and others as we watch this unfold. So the tragedy is that the folks that we're seeing now out in the world, they don't want to suffer. They really don't want to suffer, but they really are quite confused on what the causes of happiness are. They don't have the tools to clearly see that. And everything out there is the cause of all their problems. And we know this. We've got the same issue. Maybe not as right now as out there as theirs is. But everything out there is the cause of their problems. So we are all unknowingly purchasing huge amounts of dung that will be delivered in the future. That's what is playing out. We are purchasing, ordering, creating more problems for the future. So then we move into verse 9. Well, the Buddha says, well, here's something that you can do about that. There's an understanding that like dew on a tip of grass, pleasures of the three worlds last only a while and then vanish. Aspire to the never-changing supreme state of liberation. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So Venerable asks in the book, Don't Believe Everything You Think, well, what's so great about liberation? And she says, well, let's think about it. The delights of this life are fleeting. They're wonderful. They're fabulous. They're nice while they last, but then they're gone. And so as a result, one after another, we keep trying to find a happiness that is going to last here in samsara, but it's not possible. All day long, our mind runs a commentary. I like, I don't like, I want, I don't want. Anytime we meet these beautiful objects of the five senses, we chase after the ones that we label desirable and try at all costs to avoid the ones that we deem unpleasant. That's what that whole meditation on the 8 worldly concerns that Venerable Chuni did yesterday. It's all about what we do from the time we get up, for me, from the time I get out of bed in the morning to the time I go to bed. I'm continually watching how these things run my mind. So the image, like dew on a tip of grass, pleasures of the 3 worlds last only a while and then vanish, is really a stunning example of how quickly the pleasures of this world come and go. Like the fleeting dew on a blade of grass. There in the morning, and by 10 o'clock, it's gone. We are so captivated. And as Venerable says in part of this chapter, she says, we try to capture these moments of pleasure and delight by keeping photos, keeping Instagram, Facebook, videos. But that's all we have is mementos. They have ceased to exist. And so she says, it would be wise of us to recognize that happiness that doesn't last really isn't happiness. And do we want to spend our lives trying to attain something that fades and goes out of existence? And in our efforts to do that, we create a lot of destructive karma that will last and go with us in the future. So the remedy is, from what the Buddha has said, from Tame Sampo says, is to look inside our minds and ask, since we really can't get happiness that lasts in this world, maybe if I reduce my grasping, maybe if I reduce my attachment to all of that out there, maybe I can find some peace and happiness that lasts, regardless of what I have, who I am, who I'm with, what I'm doing. Maybe if I could go inward and start dealing with that. And it's a huge shift in our practice when we begin to see the futility of looking for lasting happiness outside ourselves. It's so impermanent, it's so transitory, it's so fleeting. And instead start noticing what's going on in our mind, to be more interesting, because we don't have any control out of what's going on outside of ourselves, but to bring some curiosity into what's going on inside of our minds, because that we do have some control over. That maybe we can find some peace and happiness if I subdue my need for approval, my attachment to this body, let go of my anger about how things are going, and just work on my mind with a wisdom and a compassion around the way things are going, all right? I can't control that, but I can control my response to the world and how things are going. Liberation or real freedom is freedom from afflictions and the karma we create under their influence. And once again, as Venerable Chuni said in her meditation yesterday, that the Buddha isn't saying, give up enjoyment, give up pleasure, give up fun. We have to remind ourselves over and over again that we're the human being, the family of extremes. If we can't have all of it, we can't have anything. So the Buddha is not against that. What he wants us to examine is how we exaggerate so much meaning and unrealistic expectations on what these things, what the people, the events are giving us or are going to give us. Because these things can't satisfy the criteria we set for them in any way. Beyond, small pleasure, then gone. And that imputing meaning and unrealistic expectations is part of the reason why we have so much pain in our lives. We want it to deliver something that it can't. So once again, I want to take another example in real time. So many people who are protesting the mask mandate, they want freedom to do what they want. But is that really freedom? To have a mind that is so angry, so attached to being right, and is willing to fight for it, is that really being free? The refusal to wear masks as a symbol of freedom is much more like being bound to a view that is so antithetical to the wish to be free. Because the mind is imprisoned by wrong views, suspicion, hatred, intolerance, totally in prison. There's no freedom there. What freedom can anyone have if we believe that not wearing a small piece of cloth over our mouth and nose is freedom, and wearing one is oppression? Can we see how we have imputed so much meaning, symbolism, onto a small piece of cloth that it cannot sustain? A symbol of what? One's wish to do what you want at the risk of life, your own and others. Meanwhile, COVID is out of control because people think the cause of their happiness is not wearing this little piece of cloth over their mouth and noses. Now, on the conventional level, the masks have proven to offer good protection from the virus transmission. And the mask wearers, just to be fair, can also impute a lot of meaning more than that mask can stand as well. That there's a righteousness, that there's a purity of cause, there's a crusade of goodness. It's still imputing more onto that little piece of cloth than it can tolerate. So both sides can impute a whole bunch of symbolism that serves no one, but only makes each other wrong, and then we just make enemies out of each other. To just see the insanity of this. So the Buddha is trying to open our minds to see that this is not freedom, this isn't happiness. There's no freedom if either side of us are angry, fearful, and hateful. We're all prisoners. In the Buddhist sense, real freedom is not about having the ability to act on any impulse that arises in our minds. Rather, true freedom is not being enslaved by our anger, clinging to our wrong views, just invested in suspicion, resentment, and spite. To be able to not be enslaved by them, then we're getting somewhere. And that his whole purpose to exist is to guide us to the deep state of peace and joy that comes from freeing our mind from those views, freeing our mind from those afflictions. A state of peace, and in opposite to that, generating bodhicitta, realizing the nature of reality. Freedom is not having a body under the control of afflictions and polluted karma. To be able to manifest in a form that can be of the greatest help. Now that's freedom. And in the end, turning to this commitment to end all this crazy making for ourselves and others is a very deep compassion for ourselves. That's what liberation is about. To just remove ourselves from this crazy situation. And then with verse 10, the kindness of others and wanting to repay it. All right, so we have striving for liberation. We understand the dukkha, the causes of dukkha. We see all this crazy making, how this attachment to the happiness of this life and imputing meaning where there can be none is the cause of so much of our suffering, and that we want to free ourselves from that, making this strong determination. And in verse 10 it says, however, when mothers who have loved you since time without beginning are suffering, what use is your own happiness? Therefore, to free limitless beings, develop the altruistic intention. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. There's these huge shifts in these verses. You go from just, trying to get the precious human life. I'd love to have a whole string of these. And then to realize after a while, well, although the whole string is great, but they've got to produce something greater, a true freedom. And so we then think about this true freedom of freeing ourselves from this cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death, the afflictions, the karma, the ignorance. And then what happens with this verse, we're shifting yet again into even a bigger perspective. And that we are not only focused on the liberation for ourselves from this cycle, this merry-go-round of samsara, but as we deepen this determination to be free, we see that all living beings, without exception, are also on this merry-go-round, suffering as we are. And in many cases, we can see right now a whole lot more suffering than we have anything close to resembling. And so the compassion towards ourselves for this ultimate freedom from the cycle of existence then moves outward towards others. And we commit ourselves to awakening in order to guide them to freedom. and the ultimate peace as well. So we've really stepped into a huge landscape of care, a huge landscape of aspiration, the awakening mind aspiration. Now, to do this, or to have the interest and the determination to practice the Dharma in order to fulfill this deep aspiration to help others find freedom, as well as ourselves, we really have to revisit our relationship to living beings. This is a major reconfiguration here, folks. Because right now, we have a very skewed view of them, mostly centering about how do they help us, how do they harm us. There's very little equanimity, seeing all beings with an equal and caring concern for their well-being. But with very little equanimity, there is no way that we can really open ourselves to this vast awakening mind of bodhicitta. We just can't. There's too much narrow view. There's too much small thinking. So how do we go about softening and opening our minds to bodhicitta? This verse, there's two ways to do that, to generate this amazing mind of bodhicitta. One is the 7-point instruction on cause and effect. And the other is equalizing and exchanging self and others. So in this verse, we're going to look at the first way to generate bodhicitta, which is the 7-point cause and effect instruction. Now, both of these profound practices begin with wanting to develop equanimity, which is an equal and caring concern for everyone without exception. That's the starting place, right? Easy to say, not so easy to do. And so this is the way I've been thinking about this, because sometimes I kind of go, whatever. I get so complacent about equanimity. I go from equanimity, I go to complacency rather than equanimity. So what I've been thinking is it's not easy to do because mostly we have met. I was trying to estimate, since I was born in this life, how many living beings have I met? Has it been 50,000? 10,000, 100,000, 500,000. I mean, really, it's just to conjure up, because we are so connected to each other, how many living beings? And because I'm 65, that number is increasing exponentially. And each one of them, at one time or another, I put into a category of friend, enemy, and stranger. Now, most of these thousands or hundreds of thousands of strangers that we've met, think of the sheer numbers of living beings, and that they have all been given one of these 3 labels, depending on how they treat capital M, capital E. This is like an astounding thought. One person, me, puts thousands of living beings, and we're including animals and insects, so into these little boxes, depending on how they treat this one me. Do they give me pleasure? Do they bring displeasure? Or they're not even on my radar screen? Hundreds of thousands of beings we have met in this life. And that's where they go. I think it's kind of outrageous thought. One person designating thousands of people over a lifetime into 3 tiny categories. I mean, our minds are so fickle and judgmental. The only one that matters is this one person. Driven by attachment, a few of them go into friend category. Driven by aversion, maybe a few more go into the enemy category. And then all those nebulous, faceless beings go into the stranger category. Now, at first I thought, well, rarely do a lot of people move out of the stranger category. I mean, our world of friends and enemies is, it moves around, but it's pretty small. And I was going to say, well, strangers don't change that much. But when I see what is going on with this COVID thing and the election, I can see myself putting millions of strangers into the enemy category without too much trouble. Easy peasy. In one category, out of stranger into enemy, all dictated by whatever conceptions we have according to how they treat us, whether they agree with us, whether they think like us, whether they disagree with us, have the same views. Millions of people getting thrown from stranger into enemy category. No time at all. So equanimity is all about putting everyone on some level playing field in our hearts. And it's not like we treat everybody exactly the same, but the care and the concern, their wish for well-being is equal. So from there, we look at them in regards to the 7-point cause and effect on generating bodhicitta. First step is all these friends, enemies, and strangers that through practice we can at least make the categories not so divided, is that we start wanting to see them all as having been our mother or having been our parents. Okay, now this requires a particular Buddhist worldview that our minds have existed since beginningless time. And due to afflictions, especially ignorance and the polluted karma that follows that, this mind is propelled to take rebirth in these countless different kinds of bodies. And since our existence has been since beginningless time, we have had plenty of time to have every living being in the universe be our parents, one time or another. That's an amazing thought. A parent for all the time our minds have been embodied in different bodies, we have had limitless parents. And so when we think of our parents in this life, like all of them, have cared for us, protected us, loved us, raised us, taught us so many kindnesses. And that's the second step, to just to think that every living being has been a parent to us at one time or another. And to see, because of the kindness, whether it was your parents or a caregiver or somebody close to your family who took care of you, the incredible kindness of just keeping us alive. I mean, we couldn't navigate this complex world without their care, without their time, their love, their guidance. And I don't know about you, but I never thought of my parents as anybody but, what's for dinner? Where's my laundry? Can I have the keys to the car? I mean, I never thought of them. I mean, to think of them as living beings with feelings and concerns. I never saw them having their own struggles, having their own challenges, above and beyond raising me, taking care of me, making sure everything was okay with me. I never saw that their life was much more complex, much more different than mine. They may have had a tough relationship between the two of them. There could have been some financial stuff going on. There could have been some physical illnesses, some mental issues going on between our parents. They hung in there, and for the most part, I'm going to say that most of us turned out pretty well, despite what suffering, difficulties, dukkha they may have had while they were raising us that they never told us about. Some of it was obvious. For many of us, it was obvious. But for many, that was behind closed doors. That was in the quiet of the late night that they dealt with that. And the way that I look at this is that they represent, in a pinpoint in endless time, just this life, they represent all the countless beings that have been our parents, that have been so kind. One little point of light in this one life. We have had that kind of care. We've had that kind of love. We've had that kind of protection since beginningless life. And so what has become really, it's almost like a tenderness that I'm seeing as I look at what's unfolding in our hospitals, in our clinics, on our reservations, in our inner city, hospitals, that the healthcare workers on the front lines, when you see these photographs of them holding these folks who are sick and dying from COVID in their arms, comforting them because they have no family that can be with them, working tirelessly to help them through this intense cycle of suffering. I think this is the love of Mother. This is the love of Father. And it's so easy to look at what we're seeing and see the sacrifice, see their love, their concern, their compassion. All these healthcare workers are being mothers to us all. And they will be in the future, perhaps with the same love and compassion that we are seeing now. This photograph has gone viral. I saw it a few days ago when I was checking the news. It was on the Washington Post. There is a doctor in Houston. He was born in Mexico City, Dr. Joseph Veron. He has worked 250 days straight without a break. And they have a photograph of him. He's dressed from head to toe in PPE, mask, thing on his head, a thing over his head, full body plastic, rubber gloves, and he's holding this elder man with white hair. You can't see the man's face. He's got his head tucked into Dr. Veron's chest, and he's comforting him because his wife couldn't come to see him for Thanksgiving. That's the love of Mother. That's what I'm using for my inspiration, to see beyond time and space every living being, no matter what category we put him in right now. That's the love of Mother that I'm seeing, what's going on. And now with that perspective, then we see their kindness like our parents. And the third step is then, how can I repay this? Is there any possibility of me to repay this kind of kindness, this kind of love, this kind of care, this kind of protection? And from that, the fourth and the fifth step on this 7-point is to just this, if we're really tracking this meditation and we see this kindness and we want to repay it, this heartwarming love, this compassion wells up in our hearts for all of them. And the wish to not only for them to have happiness and its causes, but to be free of suffering and all of its causes. And from that is this great resolve that we are going to commit ourselves to finding a way to repay this kindness. To say the most profound, long-term, and skillful way we can do that is to practice the path, to gain realizations of the Buddha's teachings, and to become a Buddha in order to have any chance of repaying them, which is the result of this 7-point cause and effect bodhicitta. This can have an extraordinary impact on, especially during now where we get into, there's this kind of compassion fatigue going on, a little bit of personal distress, especially if you have people in your life very, very close that are struggling with this virus. So there is no other option, and Venerable tells us the way to think. The way to free limitless beings is to develop the altruistic intention bodhicitta. It is the mind that seeks to attain full enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings most effectively. When we develop this altruistic intention, our whole practice takes on a different flavor because we have a long-term view. When we take the Bodhisattva vows, part of this whole journey, we're committing ourselves to each and every one of them. Thus, we find a way to work with frustration and obstacles along the path because we're doing it for a wonderful cause. With this altruistic intention, we seek to realize emptiness in order to remove all of our own afflictions, to remove our own inabilities to benefit others, and to gain the abilities that will enable us to benefit others most effectively. Seeing that a Buddha has the greatest ability and capacity to work for the welfare of all beings, we develop this aspiration to become a fully enlightened Buddha for their benefit. And then, as having generated bodhicitta, in the process of generating bodhicitta, then the far-reaching practices become a crucial part of our practice. So that's really what the conclusion for the 7-point cause and effect. As we continue to do it over and over again, that starts to warm up in our hearts. It starts to be familiar in our minds. Then we shift on to the second way in which to generate bodhicitta, which verse 11, shifting from the self-centered thought to cherishing others. All suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. Buddhas are born from the wish to help others. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. This is equalizing, exchanging self and others. And what this practice really brings to light is how the self-centered thought is one of the primary obstacles for generating this vast bodhicitta mind that gets in the way of really cherishing and loving others. So the first line, all suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. And we say, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a minute. My happiness comes from me. I go for it. I get it for myself. I have plenty. All for myself. What do you mean? Suffering comes from my wish for my own happiness. Well, let's see what the Buddha means. What he's pointing out to us, that it's not being so focused on our own happiness that we step over people, make problems, break trust, create discord. Because I don't know about you, but when I want my happiness, I get a little pushy to get my version of happiness. I mean, do you know that mind? It's kind of, let's just push the envelope a little bit. And you're willing to push it with the people around you to get it. That's the self-centered thought at work. And along with it, for me, a lot of times it comes with anger, it comes with stubbornness, it comes with arrogance. I'm just going to get it, and I'm going to push until I get it. And the more we push our ideas, our demands, our unrealistic expectations, what happens? The less willing people are to go along with us, except if we terrorize them enough. Then they might give us what we want, but not because they care, not because they want to connect, not because they love us and support us, because they're afraid of us. I mean, I don't know, but right now we have a prime example of how this works. If I can just bully and intimidate and terrorize the people around me, I'll get what I want. But when you can see underneath the surface, and we do this, but we're just seeing it really magnified. Everybody's on board, everybody's signing the lawsuits, everybody's signing. They're doing this out of either their own self-interest, or they're doing it because they're just terrified. Go along with the wishes, go along with our wishes. And it's just so painful to watch. Just can't even stand it, how painful it is. But we have to remember that we are not this self-centered thought. It is a deluded, erroneous state of mind. We are not that. Got to also remember that over and over again. So the antidote to this self-preoccupation is to turn the mind to others. And this beautiful image, perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. This is just a lovely, just to imagine the birth of a Buddha coming out of eons of just cherishing, loving, guiding, helping, protecting. There's this birth that happens. All the virtue and goodness of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva seeking Buddhahood increase their capacity through helping and guiding all living beings with this ever-growing mind of wisdom, this ever-growing mind of compassion, until one day their mind steps into a Buddha field of their own making due to all of this cherishing, the wisdom, the compassion. Through countless great eons, benefiting, wisdom, eliminating all the afflictions, the polluted karma, a total dependent arising due to their incredible joyous effort and hard effort. So this whole idea about perfect Buddhas, and that's what we're aspiring to be born from the thought to cherish and help others. And for us, there is immense benefit by following the teachings on cherishing others rather than the self-preoccupation. Cancer Japa Tekchak, once again. This is Venerable's interpretation of that. This is a wonderful book, by the way. Only benefit comes from cherishing others. When we cherish others, they are happy and so are we. I mean, that really sounds simple. But I got to tell you, being around happy people is really nice. That's what we work a lot on this community here, is just keep a harmony and a joy around so we can, because we impact each other a lot. We create good karma, the cause for happiness and cyclic existence, and for the attainment of awakening. When we cherish others, here's a really important piece, folks. The feelings of being alienated, lonely, and unloved cease. We are more open and confident, less suspicious and fearful. So when we look at what's going on in the world right now, and once again, I want to keep including us in our own minds as we get angry and we tighten down on what's happening. This feeling of isolation, the feeling of being alone and alienated does arise, it does increase. So does suspicion, so does fear. When you're not thinking of others, but thinking about one's own welfare, you can't see past your nose, then everything else becomes a problem. But by cherishing others, others don't harm us as often because karma rules, creating the causes to harm, we have stopped them. So many benefits come from cherishing others. Now, Venerable, once again, she knows us very well and knows that we tend to go to the two extremes. If we can't be self-centered, then we have to just give up everything and do everything that the world wants us to do. So she's once again very, very clear in the commentary here. She says it does not mean that we do everything anybody asks us to do, or we get sentimental about it, you know. Help, I want to love, I want to take care. Yes, honey, whatever you want. Sometimes cherishing others is to say no. The way that parents have to say no to their children. The way that our teacher has to say no to us when we're going down the wrong path. When we want to do what we want to do or have what we want to have isn't going to be helpful to our long-term well-being. Wise parents teach their children, wise teachers teach their students how to deal with not getting what you want, how to deal with disappointment. Because if we don't deal with that, we'll get frustrated, and I don't know about you, but I get into manipulating the outside world to see if I can get what I want. So cherishing others is the medicine for this self-centered, the self-preoccupation, in a wise and compassionate way. It's crucial as we grow in our wisdom to see that it is the self-centered thought that is the enemy of our peace, not others. And that cherishing others is a surefire way to be happy all around. So Venerable does continually steer us away from going to the extreme, from self-centeredness to denial and self-neglect. We don't neglect ourselves because we are included in the field of sentient beings. But we just make room for everybody else. All right, so we open up the room, we open up the windows, we open up the doors and let everybody in. And she says, very important to take care of these bodies. We need them to be healthy so we can practice. And more important, we need healthy minds so we can practice the Dharma, so we can help others. So we take care of our bodies, take care of our minds. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. So to increase our love and compassion, this refers to this very profound practice of taking a giving or Tonglen. It really helps build our courage, build our bodhicitta. And I have to say that because I have a really powerful imagination, that I find this practice a wonderful, virtuous use of my imagination. I want to encourage you to do this practice because it does help us use our imagination and our creativity, which sometimes we use to exaggerate and proliferate and getting ourselves all bent out of shape. Okay, so instead of using our creative story writing and imagination to bring suffering to ourselves, we use it in the Tonglen practice by using these very profound images to be able to turn our minds to develop this great compassion, this great love, this great bodhicitta. So here's how it goes. Once again, this is a beautiful practice. It's not easy to do because the self-centered thought really has a fit about it, but I'll go through it here. So we imagine taking on the suffering of others. Now, let's not get worried here. We can't actually do that. Even Buddhas can't do that. We all have our own karma. We all have our own causes and conditions that bring us into existence and will get us to awakening. But we can certainly support, but we can't take on anybody's suffering. We can't alleviate anybody's suffering but our own. But we can imagine we can. And to use their suffering to destroy our self-preoccupation, our self-obsession with ourselves. I mean, when you think about it, to increase our love and compassion by taking on others' suffering, I mean, gosh, I have a hard enough time addressing my own suffering, much less anybody else's, right? I mean, sometimes our own suffering is overwhelming enough. So this practice is in many ways very counterintuitive. So why don't we just take a moment here? Why don't I just walk us through this because I've got it kind of unpacked here. And so close your eyes and let's do this. Or you can just listen. It could be a meditation or it can just be a visualization. Just follow along as best as you can. What we're going to do is turn the tables. We're going to take on the pain of others. So whatever they are dealing with, so you can recall somebody you know in your life. You can recall a group of people out there in the world right now that you see very much suffering. And that suffering appears in the form of a dark, acrid smoke. Just sort of moving around inside of them, around them. Totally like covering them. And once again, it could be a small suffering or it can be an incredibly horrific suffering. And then we imagine our own self-centered thought, our self-obsession, appearing as a heavy lump. It could be coal, it could be a rock, in the center of our chest, which is the cause of our suffering. This tiny, narrow, tight, obsessive mind. Sitting like this heavy, leaden thing in the center of our heart chakra. And then the black smoke of whoever we are imagining they're suffering transforms into a lightning bolt that strikes at this black lump of self-centered thought and totally obliterates it. Nothing but fine dust floats away, gone. I mean, detonated. We have used the suffering and pain of the other person or the group that they don't want, that they wish would leave, end, be done, and use it to destroy that which we don't want. This habituated self-obsession and the afflictions and the karma that is created with it. So just to be reassured that we haven't taken on their suffering literally. Okay, so if you've got a little bit of anxiety and fear going on right now, you're not going to get COVID, you're not going to lose your apartment. Let go of the personal distress, thinking about them. That's not it. It is to bring compassion and love in the mind for ourselves and for them. And once the black lump and the black smoke is gone, there is spaciousness, openness, and release that arises in our heart. And then generosity comes. And this is where we can really let our imaginations soar. We can create many, many bodies in the form of whatever they might need. And for me right now, I'm using our dear ones that are taking care of everybody. Imagining emanating countless bodies that become medical professionals, staffing at clinics, staffing at health clinics that serve our Indian tribes, our poor neighborhoods, our nursing homes. We just imagine becoming doctors, nurses, technicians, radiologists, experienced, courageous, compassion coming with us. So everybody on the front lines in this situation can take a rest, feel supported. And if you have someone personally that you know that is struggling right now, think about what could they use? Who do they need right now? And imagine yourself transforming into that. So we imagine, not only do we imagine becoming these beings, these people who our loved ones, frontline workers need, school districts need, grocery stores need. We become medical equipment. We become PPEs, contact tracers, food delivery trucks, and the money to fund it all. We imagine becoming laptop computers and internet access for the students who don't have that. We imagine giving those wonderful teachers who are trying to keep their students online, together, encouraged, inspired. We imagine giving them all the support they need. Imagine our virtue emanating as food and money to pay the bills. And then imagine probably the most important image is to see our virtue helping by bringing the Dharma. So imagine all the folks out there with guns, flags, fear. Imagining the Dharma like a gentle rain into their hearts and minds. And whatever they need underneath the violence, underneath the fear, the angry faces, the intimidation. Imagine all of our virtue being able to bring the Dharma into their hearts and minds, to bring some ease, to bring some wisdom, to bring some sense of safety, being heard, being understood, letting go of all the wrong views that are driving them. And to remember to go back to the 7-point cause and effect, that they have all been and will be our mothers. And that this is not magical thinking. This is about transforming our minds that are habituated to thinking of only oneself, and how that one can be happy and avoid suffering. To slowly but surely transform the mind into a mind that takes delight in virtue, compassion, benefiting others. And we're all doing this. This is all happening. At whatever level practice we have, our sincerity of heart, our motivation, this is already in progress. It will not happen overnight. It won't happen after a few months, a few years, even a few lifetimes. But it is in progress. It is in process. And meditations like this, verses like these, are a kind of powerful, fearless thinking, that can help create the causes to someday, when we are Bodhisattvas, when we are Buddhas, to really be able to manifest in whatever way is needed, and to benefit not just a few, but countless beings. Remembering that Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. And no matter what small amount of success we may have by generating bodhicitta, taking and giving, working on our self-centeredness, it helps to open our mind, makes it stronger and more able to deal with our own hardships, our own struggles, and at the same time being able to grow the mind of bodhicitta. This is thought transformation training. To train the mind, to train our minds to see ourselves and the world in a whole new way. As a rare opportunity to practice the Bodhisattva path however we can, and to use the dung of our own doing to grow the garden, the orchard of limitless benefit. And so before I open it up for any comments or questions, I wanted to read. I think this little prayer is definitely the says it all. We recited it this morning. It's from Lama Zopa. That really embodies these verses. Whatever actions I do, eating, walking, sitting, sleeping, working, and so forth, and whatever I experience in life, up or down, happiness or pain, healthy or sick, harmony or discord, success or failure, wealth or poverty, praise or criticism, whether I'm living or dying, or even born in a horrible rebirth, whether I live long or not, may my life be beneficial for all sentient beings. The main purpose of my life is not simply to be rich, respected, famous, healthy, happy. There are those 8 worldly concerns. The meaning of my life is to benefit all sentient beings. Therefore, from now on, may whatever actions I do be beneficial for all beings. May whatever I experience in life, happiness or suffering, be dedicated to actualizing the path to awakening. May whatever I do, say, or think benefit all sentient beings and help them to attain full awakening quickly. That really is, that's it. So, that is what I have to share, and if there are any comments or questions, I will do my best.
I have a comment about this idea that are we responsible for the dung or are we not responsible? I tend to blame myself when things go wrong. So I found that thinking, this is not me. It was a past life who created this karma. It's helpful so that I don't go into self-blaming and criticism. So it's very helpful to think, I didn't ask for this. I just am the inheritor. But then when I want to blame others, like it's their fault, I find that remembering that it's my own karma that is responsible for this, that's helpful. But I find that if I just say, oh, I created the cause, I too easily go into self-blame, and then I can't have compassion for myself.
Yeah, that's great. So once again, it's an opportunity to, okay, how do I use the Dharma on one part of my mind that goes this way and another part of mind that goes that way? And they both come to the idea that you can still use that stuff to grow flowers. You can still use it to grow beautiful fruit that then you share with others. So wonderful insight. Thank you.
When you talked about how bullies get what they want, but people give it with fear, it reminded me of when I was teaching a group of in high school, and there was a little gang, right, that was headed by a bully that everybody was terrified of. And then one day he broke his arm punching a fire extinguisher and had to be at home. And I was fully expecting the gang of friends to like help him. And I talked to the class too about like, how do we help this person who's deeply unhappy? Every single one in the gang spoke so poorly of him. It was really shocking to me. All these people I thought were his friends started to badmouth him and talk about how much they disliked him, but they would never do that to his face. It was so sad, to see the bully has no friends.
Has no friends. Yeah, yeah. And that's a pretty lonely place to be. Yeah, and I try to wonder about bullies, I have a little bit of that in me. I've been working on that. Just trying to, this whole idea about trying to be happy. We've got such a plethora of strategies, and this one is the most apparent, seems to get the most bang for the buck, at least on the surface, but underneath there's this river of, such unhappiness, such sorrow. So, and it's, when we see that in our culture, that has seemed to have escalated over the years. And I'm not quite sure whether, children and teenagers and adults, what's not happening. The happiness of just this life tends to become a deep conundrum. Because if you want to, if you have a little bully tendencies and you keep getting foiled by samsara, there's got to be somebody you got to take it out on, because there's no capacity to own it. And the thing is that the world isn't asking us to own everything. It's just asking us to own our part. But for bully, that's not even possible. So, yeah, Venerable.
Line. How does the smoke transform into the lightning bolt?
Well, folks, that's part of the imagery. There's no, let's see, how would I answer that? Well, the smoke probably wouldn't have, this is the way I imagine it when I do the meditation. The smoke doesn't have any, it's insidious when it's circling the person who's suffering. But because the lump of the self-centered thought is so darn intense and hard and heavy and laden, a stream of smoke wouldn't do the job. I mean, they actually say you can not only lighten it, if you want to put a bomb on it, you can put a bomb on it. I mean, there's different images, but I don't think there's a detail. Is there a reason for that? I think it's just the imagery that the great masters have used to mostly just explain that it's got to be a kind of force that's going to obliterate something that's been with us since beginningless time. So it's got to be something that's got some velocity, something that's got some power. So Venerable Trini's saying that smoke just, there's a thickening aspect to it as part of the visualization that then becomes this, lightning bolt, bomb. Venerable, we have a Venerable Nima behind you. He's got a comment.
I don't know if this will be helpful, but for me, what is driving the smoke and what is the real cause of the explosion of the self-centeredness is our willingness to take on the suffering of others. So that's what's sort of driving this whole process, and that's what causes that self-centeredness to then sort of shatter, because we've now engaged in the opposite of that.
And when you think of a natural phenomenon that has the type of velocity that it would require to make that turn.
I kind of explained it to myself similar to like a volcanic cloud of ash. You know, it naturally has the lightning when the volcano is erupting.
Mm-hmm. Creating its own environment, right?
It's not necessarily smoke, it's a mixture of ash and smoke, but there's lightning in that cloud.
But what's really important, folks, is that we've got to be able to generate the feeling in the mind. You know, we want to be sure that we don't get too caught up in the details of what's happening, but what is it eliciting inside of our hearts? All right? That's what we're focusing on. And imagery, you know, you can work a little bit with this. There's some different versions of this. This is the one that I've seen and the one that I use with a lot of success. Venerable Losang.
In transforming adversity into joy and courage, one image that is used also is like it becomes like the force of like a water hose pushing a pile of black dust away, and it's totally gone. Mm-hmm. Something that came up to me for the first time doing it today was the thought that that black lump of coal is the source of my own smoke. And so but I like the lightning bolt because it turns from this dark to this flash. Brilliant. And then I go into trying to be in a spacious light place.
Yeah. Lump of charcoal causes its own acrid smoke. Okay, one more.
So someone was saying that they were asking, where does the effect of Tonglen happen in their own mind or in the other person's mind that they're thinking about? What if they've died? Does that make a difference? And then they say they want to envision benefit going to the other person, not just their own mind.
Yeah, well, that's the main practice. We don't have too much say about the benefit that's going to occur in other people's minds. This is really much thought transformation of one's own mind. So we don't have, for the beauty of the giving of whatever people need, there's no guarantee that that's going to be delivered at the door. We don't have power over the karma of others. But the fact that we can transform our mind to that level regarding our self-centered thought, by extension, others are going to be impacted by this practice. So the more that we're able to relinquish our self-centered thought and start modeling this love, this compassion, this tenderness for others, people in the world are going to feel the effect. And in that way, by extension, then their lives change. And it just becomes this beautiful circle. So not directly, but by extension.